we've discussed many times before, we have a problem at the moment in the people, and the type of thinking that prevails at the top of organisations is really unsuited to the challenges ahead, and has arguably caused quite a few of the problems that we have.
Knowing the models inside out, being able to cite case studies, all the other stuff that you think is important when you're on your program actually has very little utility beyond it.
To be fair to my school, we did have one morning where we talked about ethics.
The idea that as a leader, what you have to develop is your own style and your own personal practice that also includes your your mental and psychological well-being.
Is tuition the right tool to help them achieve that? So is it tuition on ethics? Is it tuition on critical thinking? Is it tuition on the self-awareness, or is it something else that might work better?
Being able to interact really well with people, absolute freaking superpower.
We need sense-making, decision-making, and action-taking closely coupled at the bottom, which basically means everybody needs to be figuring out what the hell's going on and coming up with ideas and taking action.
Maybe the leader is the person that shuts up in the room.
Welcome everybody to this episode of Work Punks. Colin Newlyn, Ben Simpson, who's still recovering from a bout of COVID by the sounds of, and myself, Paul Jansen, to talk about things that have occupied us in the workspace. Ben, you have been thinking about how to prepare leaders for this day and age, for the 2020s. What was the context, and what were your initial thoughts? What did you come up with?
I have, yeah. I was given the opportunity to have a think about what a progressive MBA might look like, having done an MBA nearly 20 years ago. I believe, Paul, that's something we have in common. But regardless of what we thought about MBAs then, or even what we think about them now, the world has changed beyond all recognition, and I thought it might be useful for us just to kick around some ideas today to talk about what can and should be different in terms of equipping leaders in the where we are now in the mid 2020s, basically. And I found that quite an interesting exercise, so I thought we could kind of expand that out to a little bit of discussion. A lot of this won't come as any great surprise, certainly to you two or to many of our listeners and viewers, I'm sure, but the sort of things that came up for me that were important were, recognizing that organizations are complex adaptive systems and not sausage machines, and giving them the knowledge and vocabulary and skills to be able to discern which challenges that they meet are merely complicated and those which are complex, and having the wherewithal to come up with kind of strategies for both. I think other things that are very different now, Paul, I'm sure when you did your MBA, as was the case when I did mine, we were taught in the school of kind of deterministic strategy, where we can assemble a whole load of data, probably pay consultants a whole load of money for it, and we can come up with something that describes absolutely what we're going to be doing for the next kind of 5 years. I don't think we live in that world anymore. So I think it's really, really important that we equip the leaders of today and tomorrow with the ability to be able to develop kind of emergent strategy, because I don't see anything else kind of being fit for purpose given the state of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, etc. So then other things that came up for me, I guess one of my overarching reflections was when I did the MBA, it was largely around acquiring knowledge rather than skill, and that thankfully I've observed that changing, and I think that's a good thing. But I think there's also the value of tacit knowledge as opposed to explicit knowledge. and linked to that, I guess, is another kind of continuum. Is it equipping people to run effective businesses, or is it teaching people to lead effective organizations? And that they are, for me, they're both vitally important, but we, you know, but they are probably of equal importance. And I would suggest when I did my qualification, it was predominantly around the job of running a business as opposed to leading an organization. And I think, you know, a lot that we've learned in the intervening time tells us that actually the latter is as, if not more, important. And then kind of bringing us right up to date, and I will shut up after this, but bringing us right up to date, you know, one of the big challenges that we observe and helping people with is, for many of them, very new to them, and that's leading in a remote environment. Something that only a very small percentage of people were doing probably 3.5 years ago, and now it's, to a lesser or greater extent, probably everybody's having to understand how they optimize for leading in a remote environment. And I think there are probably not many leaders, certainly that I know, that wouldn't say, well, yeah, actually, I could do with some help in that. So, yeah, just as a flavour, those are the sorts of things that came to mind for me. But yeah, I don't know. Perhaps, Paul, share your reflections. Your MBA is a similar vintage to mine.
Well, one thing that springs to mind is that always present question around to what extent you can be taught to be a good leader. There's many ways in you can develop yourself, and there's many ways in which you can be made aware of things that otherwise you wouldn't have been aware of. If anything, the assumptions that very often implicitly underpin a lot of the things that we do and take for granted, how we organize ourselves, how we make decisions, which priorities we set, and all the rest of it. I think the modern leader is certainly, or the ideal modern leader should, in my opinion, be much more self-aware about that than perhaps we were taught back in the days. And a lot of those assumptions, I think, they still form the basis for a lot of things that we do in our economies, and not just in business, but also in other organizations, such as our relentless focus on efficiency, for instance, and how we feel that efficiency is best achieved. Division of labor, bureaucratic determination of jobs and roles, and relentless focus on getting the cheapest resource to do the simplest task, and thinking that always ends up with the best outcome and the best quality result. I think a lot of those assumptions are luckily challenged by some brighter thinkers, more daring people, and I hope that a progressive MBA would indeed contribute to that thinking. I think that would be fantastic. There was very little space in my MBA, I felt, for we talked a lot about shareholder value, for instance. Shareholder value 25 years ago was sort of the big thing, right? And also my employer was largely, was completely in love with that idea. Felt that was the way for them to catch up with the real big players in the market. And to raise the question about, yeah, but actually, who is the shareholder, and why is he or she so important, or all important, more importantly? It was well, that question certainly wasn't raised, let alone answered. And I think we've moved away from that a little bit, but we're not nearly in a place where we're comfortable with the answer and comfortable with a different way of doing things. So for me, a progressive MBA should certainly spend some time on that. and managing the dilemmas that brings, rather than assuming that there is a all-encompassing formula that will lead to popping out the right answer for you as a business or for you as an organization. Can leading be taught? I think it's important to have a range of skills for a leader to understand quite a lot of how the functions in an organization typically work together and influence each other, and how to balance those opposite forces that operate in an organization in terms of priority setting, resource allocation, and things like that is a really useful foundation to have. And in that sense, I think MBA-like courses have something to offer. That's not necessarily about leading, though. That's about understanding the running of an organization, the managing literally of the different components of the different parts of the machinery, rather than where am I going to take this piece of machinery and how am I going to transform it into something that will consistently deliver what adds value to society or to my clients or to my constituents. So, Colin, what do you think about MBAs? I mean, you as non-MBA.
Yeah, I can bring my thoroughly prejudiced and jaundiced views to bear on this.
Please do.
So, as I have no experience of doing an MBA, although I sadly do have experience of people who have done MBAs, and it's not always been positive.
What a lovely thing to say about the two of us, Colin.
No, you are obviously the exceptions to that. But I think that, I mean, as we've discussed many times before, we have a problem at the moment in the people and the type of thinking that prevails at the top of organisations is really unsuited to the challenges ahead, and has arguably caused quite a few of the problems that we have. And I was struck by your comment about, when you did yours, Paul, it was all about shareholder value, which of course has been the driving force of the last 50 years, really, since the 1970s. And of course, that's a very simplistic view of the world, isn't it? That all we have to do is make profits and satisfy our shareholders. And clearly, that was never really the case. You could just get away with ignoring everybody else. But now organizations are running into the reality that actually there are several needs they have to meet, and they are often competing and conflicting. Often they're ambiguous and difficult to pin down, and there's a lot of uncertainty to deal with. And the whole point of an MBA is to teach you how the machine works. It's predictable, it's deterministic, as you said, Ben. And actually, it doesn't give you the agility of thinking to be able to deal with this new world. So, I think it is important to know how an organization works together. And I was lucky to pick that up because I was doing product management and I had to talk to every bit of the organization. So I sort of figured it out for myself. But that's one of the lesser parts, I think, of being able to lead an organization, or to be a leader without necessarily being able to lead an organization. So I liked a lot of the stuff you put in, Ben, but I would add in a lot of stuff around self-awareness, self-knowledge, the idea that as a leader, what you have to develop is your own style and your own personal practice that also includes your your mental and psychological well-being, because so you can be a stable leader going forward and not be someone who's going to pull 20-hour days for 2 years and then crash in a heap. Much like the guy who took over at HSBC didn't he? I can't remember his name now. The Alterio. He took over and then he had to take a sabbatical for 9 months because he'd burnt out.
I thought he was the Lloyd's guy, but it doesn't matter.
Lloyd's guy, yes, no, you're correct. You're correct. Anyway, so we had someone, highly fated leader, comes in, takes over a big organization, then after 6 months collapses in a heap because he's been overdoing it. That's not leadership. And that's not a healthy thing to teach people. I suppose the other thing is about critical thinking. You need to have the critical thinking to be able to question what you're doing already and to question the models that are being presented to you, and to come up with new perspectives. So I think the way MBAs have been taught, maybe looking at businesses, all we have to do is find out, what the system is, what the process is, and we just run the process. So it's very linear, very straight and direct. And actually, it's not like that at all. People need to be able to look at the problems from multiple perspectives. And I think that's a skill that you can teach people and an awareness you can give people. And they need to be much better at creating ideas and solutions and, experimenting and all that sort of stuff. And of course, the one thing you did mention it actually, culture. Now, I'm not totally happy with culture, but I think leaders do set the climate for an organization, and that is a responsibility and a skill, which also needs to be taught, or at least people need to be schooled in it. I think that's probably a better way, isn't it? You school people in it, and then they figure out how to apply the skills themselves. So much more around train the leader, or giving the person the skills so they can develop the leader they want to become within them, rather than here's a bunch of formulas and processes and stuff that you can apply to climb up the greasy pole. And ethics as well, has been notably absent from MBA courses ever since they said screw everybody else, just go for the profit.
To be fair to my school, we did have one morning where we talked about ethics. So it was there in the curriculum somewhere, and I don't think there was a lesson entitled "How to Make as Much Money as Possible and Screw Everybody Else."
That was the subtext.
Yeah, I was going to say, expressed or implied. Yeah,
that's a legal small print that I just want to get in there. No, that's just to be fair. But it raises for me the question: what do aspiring leaders therefore need in terms of? Do they need tuition to make? Because usually you come up in an organization because you're successful, partly because you're really good at what you do technically, and or partly because you're really visible in how you bring people together and get the most out of them, and ideally those two come together and you've got a great package to become a future leader, right? So what's then the gap that you're trying to help these people to overcome? And B, is tuition the right tool to help them achieve that? So is it tuition on ethics? Is it tuition on critical thinking? Is it tuition on the self-awareness, or is it something else that might work better?
So for me, one of the more valuable things, and this is quite interesting because it kind of date stamps sort of the era 2005, 2006 when I did mine. So one of the skill-based things that we were taught was presentation skills. And there was an extremely good external trainer who came in. He was the guy, I think he's in Australia now, but to give you an indication of the quality of the individual, he was given the job by the BBC of coaching Gary Lineker when he transitioned from being a player to being a pundit. And the early Gary's first steps into punditry wouldn't be things that he's particularly proud of, but this guy helped him make the transition. So immensely powerful in terms of building that capability and being comfortable presenting to groups. incredibly useful as a leader. And so, but entirely kind of skills based and not academic. But probably the one thing that I referred to in all of the many Lever Arch files I acquired was just to go back and give myself a little bit of a reminder. So I think, you know, that's a good example of the program that I was on was the architects of that were wise enough to include some practical skills development, but really just a tiny fraction amongst an absolute ocean of learning, express knowledge, not even developing tacit knowledge. And I think the progressive MBA would switch that. I've no idea academically how it would be assessed, but I do get a sense that, you know, knowing the models inside out, being able to cite case studies, all the other stuff that you think is important when you're on your program actually has very little utility beyond it. And linked to that, coming back to your challenge, Paul, or your question, you know, can leadership be taught? I think it is interesting that there's been some really good science, some really good research around the difference between merely good leaders and exceptionally good leaders, you know, kicking around since the 1960s. And what that research found was that the difference that made a difference was the ability of those individuals to interact with others. It's kind of not rocket science. It's not rocket science, is it? Because, you know, as a senior leader, we have to largely leave our technical background behind us, so that no matter how good we are at it, and our job is different now, and we don't do anything directly. Everything that we do is through other people within and beyond the organization. So being able to interact really well with people, which I absolutely agree with you, Colin, needs to be built on a platform of understanding self first. Absolute freaking superpower. But where is that in the curriculum anywhere? Absolutely no attention paid to thinking styles, listening, speaking, convening good, equal, psychologically safe conversations in groups. You know, that for me is the superpower, and it genuinely bemuses me that is pretty much absent. And the interesting thing about it is, once you open the door and you give people those skills through repeated cycles of practice and feedback in a safe environment, they turn around and they say, I don't know how I've got through life with, you know, such clumsy language and being so unconscious about my interactions. And by the way, this isn't just going to be a game changer for me in my world of work. It's also going to be a game changer with me with, you know, with my kids, with my spouse, whatever. Yeah. So for me, I mean, are leaders born or can they be made? I'll sit on the fence with that one, Paul, but I'm saying we can do a hell of a lot more to equip everybody, not just leaders, to be brilliant in groups, and where appropriate, be comfortable to step up and take the lead. Say, I mentioned date stamp, and isn't it interesting that the one kind of practical skill that they chose to give us was how we are going to talk in one direction to other people. You know, now, you know, based on, so compare and contrast that with what I've just said. You know, maybe the leader is the person that shuts up in the room. Maybe the leader is the person that draws the quiet people out. Maybe the leader in the room is the person that sets kind of the boundaries or the principles and allows the conversation, the decision, the whatever to emerge, because no one's as smart as anyone, least of all the leader. So I think that's quite an interesting comparison to take. The other one that kind of echoes it is after I did the program, very excitedly, someone revisiting the campus. Oh, Ben, we've got this new module. Oh, what we're really excited about. Oh, what's that? Oh, so it's managing conflict, I think, or no, it wasn't. It was negotiation skills. Negotiation skills. Oh, that's great. And when are we going to develop the module on collaboration skills? Because surely, we know that win-win beats win-lose or lose-win. So why are we teaching people to just be aggressive negotiators? I hadn't thought of that. So it is quite interesting how the world has changed.
No, I was going to say, I mean, implicit in what you were saying there, and in fact, in the whole sort of premise that leaders should get training and there should be an MBA, is hierarchy. That people do it. I mean, people do MBAs to climb the greasy pole and earn loads of money. That's pretty much the pitch from the industry. And of course, if you're only teaching leadership skills to the people that either are or you think are going to be leaders, then it's a very small part of the organization. I mean, I would point out the fact that most people get given these skills in their 40s and 50s when they're already too late to learn anything. Is beside the point. But so these are actually skills that everybody should be taught, because the old hierarchical structure, people at the top had to be smart because they were the ones that took all the decisions and figured everything out. And that's not how business works today. And going forward, businesses need to be agile. And as my friend Jeff Marlowe would say, we need sense-making, decision-making, and action-taking closely coupled at the bottom, which basically means everybody needs to be figuring out what the hell's going on and coming up with ideas and taking action. Mm-hmm. So the idea that you should only teach skills to the people, this little select cadre at the top, is completely inappropriate. We talked a little bit about, teaching them how to, or showing them, or I don't know, schooling them in how emergence happens, because that's a thing that most don't really understand. It's really important. But of course, what you really want is you want leaders to emerge. And you can't have leaders emerging if you're deciding in advance who's going to be the leaders and only giving them the training. So, these are really, and these are life skills, really. I mean, it's bizarre, isn't it? You go on an MBA and you learn loads and loads about business. You don't learn anything about people, who are actually the things that make the business work. A lot of the skills that are lacking in leaderships is, they don't understand themselves. They don't understand other people properly. They don't understand the psychology of people, of groups, of, how people interact. And that's why they think that collaboration happens around a water cooler. If you understand collaboration, then you'll know it's about, how you bring people together and engage them, and all the stuff Ben was talking about. It's about, the psychology. You need, I mean, whether you know it explicitly or just implicitly, you need to have that, I guess the tag that we slapped on it be emotional intelligence. But it's a bit more than that. It's knowing how to, set the scene for people and engage them and get them relaxed and interacting and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. And of course, we have lots of CEOs at the top of organizations. I mean, I saw a survey the other day, 75% of CEOs surveyed thought that people will be back in the office 5 days a week in 2 years' time. And their justification for wanting people back in the office is collaboration and water cooler moments. So they think it's just about getting people together around a water cooler. And of course, it's nothing like that at all. Collaboration can happen remotely. It's perfectly practical. In fact, lots of collaboration happens remotely. I mean, people win Nobel Prizes essentially collaborating remotely. It's just...
Yeah, so a lot of the skills, therefore, that are required are sort of the softer skills, the social skills, but also the letting go skills, right? The accepting that, as you said, Colin, that you're not the person who comes up with all of the answers, but actually your task is to making sure that everybody else is feeling comfortable enough so that they can come up with the answers, and then they can come up with the experiments that might lead to the answers. Yeah, so it will be interesting to see what the best method is to get emergent leaders to develop those skills, right? Because that's not something that you do in a 3-day online course or a retreat in some fancy resort. That's something that you develop over time with if you back some thoughts, I think.
Yeah.
And as you said, Ben, it may be hard to define what the exam criteria will be and how to test these people on their success. But for me, that sounds more like this is a coaching trajectory or a peer support trajectory rather than something that is more classroom based.
I did brag a little bit about when you talked about managing people in remote environments. I think was because the skills you need to manage a remote team are the skills you need to manage any team well. Good managers are not struggling with remote, right? So you don't. What we're talking about is getting people to manage, to lead, to manage, whatever term you want to use, well, with consideration, with subtlety and nuance and understanding and all that stuff. And the other point I wanted to pick up on was you said about the research of what leaders need. Whether leaders are successful or not is very contextually dependent. And somebody can be really good leader in one situation and struggle in another. It's a bit what you're saying earlier about recognizing, when things are complicated and when things are complex and when they're chaotic and all that sort of stuff. And having the ability to recognize the situation that you're in and adapt to that, that's what people need to be taught. And they need to be, you need to teach them because they need to understand the concept. They need to understand, for example, there are other ways of organizing than a hierarchy, and what the challenges of those are. But they need to develop the ability themselves to be able to adapt in those situations, and that's through experimentation and feedback and stuff like that.
So Ben, have you got enough ingredients for your progressive MBA?
Oh, I think so. Yeah, well, I think we ought to just launch it. I really like the idea that this, one of the vital ingredients is that it should be just super accessible to anybody, because these skills are universally useful. And what a great way of enabling good leadership to emerge than to equip everybody with a really solid foundation of the skills that will serve them well, and just see what emerges. I think that's a really, really lovely insight that's come out of this conversation.
Well, let's round off this this session of Work Punks. Watch Ben's space. Because this progressive MBA looks like it's going to be coming out pretty soon. I'm sure there will be lots and lots of interest for it. But you listeners and viewers, please let us have your ideas for what a progressive MBA should look like, and also importantly, what perhaps definitely should not be part of it compared to more traditional ways of teaching. And of course, we hope to see you again at one of our next episodes. So see you then. Bye.
Until then, goodbye. Cheerio.